Chapter 2, Part A of Aces Up by Covington Clarke. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. A Pass to Paris. The following morning dawned with the quiet splendor and benediction which April mornings bring to the rural province of Côte d'Or. By the time the sun had climbed above the low hills to the east and was turning the dew-covered fields into limitless acres of flashing diamonds and sapphires, McGee and Larkin had hurried through breakfast and were on their way out to the hangars where the mechanics, following Larkin's orders, would have the two camels waiting on the line. As the car rolled along the smooth highway leading to the flying field, McGee sank back in the none too comfortable cushions and drank deep of the tonic of early morning. "Some day," he said. Larkin merely nodded, the only reply needed when spring is in the air. "It would be more fun to drive up to Paris," McGee offered. Larkin looked at him in surprise. "Where'd you get that idea?" "Well, nearly all my impressions of France are from the air. It stands for so many squares of green fields, of little rivers gleaming like silver ribbons interlaced through squares of green and brown plush, of torn-up battle fronts where life is no life, no color, nothing but desolation. But this seems like another world. Here are spring flowers, the orchards are in bloom, and children are playing in the narrow streets of the towns. Flying over it, you look down on all that. You see it, and you don't see it. But in driving we would feel that we were a part of it. There's a difference. It gives you a feeling that you are better acquainted with the people, and you get a chance to smell something besides the beastly old Clerget motors in those camels. I'm getting so I feel sick every time I smell burning oil. Let's drive up, Buzz." Larkin, being in a different frame of mind, shook his head. "No, you're too blasted poetic about it already. Besides, we have permission to fly up, not to drive. I suppose we could get the pass changed, but why fool with your luck? And the quicker we get there, the more we see." "All right. But on a day like this I could get more pleasure out of just wandering through the countryside than in seeing all the cities of the world rolled into one. Look." He pointed to the flying field as the car turned from the highway. "There are the camels, warming up and filling this good clean air with their sickening fumes. Bah, I hate it." "Say, have you got the pip? You talk like a farmer. Snap out of it. We're headed for Gay Paris." The car had rolled to a stop at the edge of the field. McGee climbed out slowly. "All right, big boy. You lead the way. And no contour chasing today. I'm too liable to get absent-minded and try to reach out and pick some daisies. Besides, this motor of mine has been trickier than usual in the last few days, despite the fact that the Ac Emma declares she is top hole. So fly high and handsome. Know the way?" Larkin was crawling into his flying suit and did not answer. "Know the way?" McGee repeated. "Sure. That's a fine question to ask a pilot bound for Paris. We land at Le Bourget Field, you know." "No, I didn't know." "Where do you think you'd land? In the Champs-Élysées?" "I'm liable to land on a church steeple if that motor cuts out on me as it did yesterday afternoon, for no reason at all. Remember, no contour chasing and no dogfighting. We're going to Paris." Larkin grinned. Rarely did they go into the air together, but what they engaged in mimic warfare, dogfighting, before their wheels again touched the ground. It was the airman's game of tag, the winner being that one who could get on the other's tail and stay there. It was a thunderous, strut-singing game wherein the pursued threw his plane into fantastic gyrations in a frenzied, wild effort to shake off the pursuer and get on his tail. It was a game in which McGee excelled. Although Larkin recognized this fact, he was always the first to start the dogfight and had never found McGee unwilling to play. As for contour chasing, well, they had broken regulations times without number, and to date had paid no penalty. McGee, knowing what thoughts lurked behind Larkin's grin, wagged a prudent finger under his nose. "Mind your step, Buzz," he warned. "We are supposed to be sedate, dignified, instruction-keeping instructors. Fly northwest to Auxerre, and then follow the railroad toward Sens and on to Melun. then swing straight north and come into Le Bourget from the east." "All right. All set?" "Yes. You lead off and I'll follow. Wait. On second thought, I think I'll lead and pick my own altitude. And if you start any funny business, I'll leave you flat." They climbed into the waiting planes, whose motors were still warming idly. Members of the ground crew took up their stations at the wing tips. McGee was on the point of nodding to the crew to remove the wheel chocks, when he remembered that for the first time in his experience as a pilot, he had climbed into the cockpit without first casting an appraising eye over braces, struts, and turnbuckles. He promptly cut the motor and climbed from the plane, saying half aloud, "I must be getting balmy. It's the weather, I guess." "How's that, sir?" asked the air mechanic. "I say, it's balmy weather we're having." "Oh, yes, sir." "You've checked her all over, Wilson?" "Yes, sir, and fueled her according to Lieutenant Larkin's instructions." McGee slowly walked around the plane, giving every functional detail a critical look. Nor was he the least hurried by the fact that Larkin was displaying impatience. Satisfied at last, he climbed back into the plane. A member of the ground crew took his place at the propeller. "Petrol off, sir?" "Petrol off." Whish, whish went the prop as the helper began pulling it over against the compression. "Contact, sir." "Contact." The motor caught, coughed, caught again, and the prop whirled into an indistinct blur. The sudden blast of wind sent clouds of dust eddying toward the hangar, but ahead lay the cool, fresh, dew-washed green of the field. McGee turned to look once more at the windsock, which, for want of a breeze, hung limp along its staff. He nodded to the men at the wheel chocks, waved his hand to Larkin, and gave her the gun. No pilot in the service could lift a Camel off the ground quicker than could McGee. But this morning he taxied slowly forward, and was getting dangerously near the end of the field before he began to get the tail up. Larkin, watching him, chuckled. "Guess he wants to take a spin on the ground," he commented to himself. "Fancy that bird wanting to go to Paris by motor." Then, to show how little he thought of the ground, he advanced his throttle rapidly and took off on far less space than should ever be attempted by one who knows, from experience, how suddenly a crowded Clerget-motored Camel can sputter and incontinently die. And as a parting defiance to his knowledge, Larkin pulled back his stick and zoomed. Altitude was what McGee wanted, eh? Well, here was the way to get altitude in a hurry. McGee, glancing backward, saw the takeoff and the zoom. "The poor fish," was his mental comment. "If he shows that kind of stuff to this squadron, they'll be needing a lot of replacements, or yelling for a new instructor." But the appreciative ground crew watching expressed a different view. "Boy," exclaimed an envious Ack Emma, "can that baby fly! I'll tell the world. Watch him outclimb McGee. Did you see how McGee took off? Like a cadet doing solo, afraid to lift her. And they say he's one of the best aces in the RFC. Huh, I think he's got the pip. Ever since he first touched his wheels to this drome, he's been yelling about his motor being cranky. And it's all Jake. She takes gas like a racehorse takes rein." "Yeah," growled a mechanic by the name of Flynn, who by nature and nationality stood ready to defend anyone bearing the name of McGee. "A lot you know about those little teapots in them Camels. You was trained on Jennies and Fords. What you know about a Clerget engine could be written on the back of a postage stamp. Say, do you know why he took her off so gentle? Well, I'll spread light in dark places, brother. He took off slow because he knew you didn't know nothin', see? Say, listen." The quarrel went on, despite the fact that the two pilots constituting the meatless bone of contention were rapidly becoming specks in the sky to the northwest. At 5,000 feet, McGee leveled off and swung slightly west. He looked back and up. Larkin was 500 feet above him and somewhat behind. But at McGee's signal, he dived down, taking up a position on the left. In this manner they could point out objects below and engage in the sign language which they had perfected through many hours spent in the air together. As they flew along, McGee felt his spirits mounting. It was a good world to live in, and life was made especially sweet and interesting by the soft unfolding greens of a land brought to bud and blossom by April's sun and showers. In the beautiful panorama below there was nothing to indicate that a few miles to the eastward mighty armies were striving over a tortured strip of blasted land that for years to come would lie fruitless and barren. Here all was peace, with never a hint. Yes, far below on the white ribbon of roadway a long dark python was slowly dragging itself forward. It was a familiar sight to Larkin and McGee, troops moving up to the theater of war. And over on another road a long procession of humpbacked brown toads were plodding eastward. Motor lorries, carrying munitions and supplies. Strange monsters, these, to be coming from the green fields and woods of a seeming peaceful countryside. Forward, ever forward, they made their way. Never, it seemed to McGee, had he seen roads choked with returning men and munitions. Was the maw of the monster there to the eastward bottomless and insatiable? Where were the roads that led men back to the land of living, green things? As they passed over a town, McGee saw Larkin point down. On the outskirts of the village, a great cross in a circlet of green marked the location of a military hospital. Ah, yes, some came back. But even then they must brand their pain-racked sanctuary with the mercy-imploring emblem of the Red Cross, so that enemy planes bent on devastation would mingle mercy with the hope of victory and save their bombs for those not yet carried into the long wards where white-robed doctors and nurses battled with death and spoke words of hope to the hopeless. It was a sorry world. McGee, who but a few short minutes ago was entranced by the beauty of the world, now felt a sudden, marked disgust. He pulled his stick back sharply. He would climb out of it. He would get up against the ceiling, where the world became a dim, faint blur, or was lost altogether in a kindly, obliterating ground haze. On McGee's part, the action was nothing more than an unconscious reaction to distressing thoughts. Larkin, however, on seeing the sudden climb, grinned with delight. This climb for altitude was nothing more than the prelude to a dive that would start them into a merry game of hare and hound. So McGee had forgotten all about his doleful sermon against dogfighting? And so soon? Ha! Trust the freckled little shrimp to feel blood racing through his veins when motors are singing sweetly. Instead of following, Larkin decided to nose down and offer more tantalizing bait. McGee, seeing the dive, found it more than he could resist. Besides, a merry little chase would serve to wash the brooding thoughts from his mind. This was a morning for sport, for jest, for youth, for hazard. Forward went the stick, and he plunged down the backwash of Larkin's diving plane, his motor roaring its cadenced challenge. This was something like. Sky and ground were rushing toward each other. The braces were screaming like banshees. The speed indicator hand was mounting with a steady march that made one want to dive on and on and on until... Larkin, in the plane ahead, brought his stick backward as he made ready to go over in a tight loop. McGee smiled and followed him over. When they came out of the loop, they were in the same relative position. Larkin the hare, McGee the tenacious hound. For the next few minutes, the open-mouthed countrymen in the fields below were treated to a series of aerial gymnastics which must have sent their own pulses racing, and which might well serve them for fireside narration for years to come. The two darting hawks, Immelmanned, looped, barrel-rolled, side-slipped, then plunged into a dizzy circle in which they flew round and round an imaginary axis, the radius of the circle growing ever shorter and shorter. Every action of the leading plane was immediately matched by the pursuer. Larkin, realizing that his skill in maneuvering was something less than McGee's, decided to bring the contest to a close with a few thrills in hedge-hopping. Of all sports that offer high hazard to thrill-satiated war pilots, that of hedge-hopping or contour chasing occupies first place. This is particularly true when the pilot is flying a Sopwith Camel powered by the temperamental Clerget motor with its malfunctioning wind-driven gasoline pump. The sport had been repeatedly forbidden by all the Allied air commands, but these commands had to deal with irrepressible youth, which has slight regard for doddering old mossbacks who think that a plane should be handled as a wheelchair. Larkin dived at the ground like a hawk that has sighted some napping rodent, and so near did he come that by the time he had leveled off, his wheels were almost touching the ground, and wheels must not touch when one is screaming through space at the rate of 140 miles per hour. He glanced back. Sure enough, McGee was still on his tail. No hedge hopping, eh? Huh. Trust the shrimp to keep young, he thought. Fat chance they had of getting old. Who ever heard of an old war pilot? Ha! That's a good one. And here's a double row of tall poplars fringing the road directly ahead. Hold her close to the ground, and then zoom her at the last minute. Landing gears just clearing the topmost branches. Make it, and that's hedge hopping. Fail to make it, and that's bad news. Larkin made it, a beautiful zoom that carried him over the trees by a skillful margin. Then he swooped down again, skimming along the level field on the other side of the road. McGee's zoom was just as spectacular and as nicely timed. But as his nose climbed above the first row of trees, his motor died as suddenly as though throttled by the strangling hands of some unseen genii. Sudden though it was, McGee had sensed that he was crowding the motor too much and had tried to ease her off and still clear the trees. It was too late to relieve the choked motor, but he did clear the first row of trees. He was about to close his eyes against the inevitable crash into the poplars on the other side of the road, when he saw that 2 of the trees had been felled, and that so recently that the woodsman had not yet worked them up. There was one clear chance left. If only he could slip her over just far enough to clear the outstretched limbs of the tree to the right. At such a time, seconds must be divided into hundredths, and action must be instantaneous, instinctive, and without flaw. McGee felt one of the spreading limbs brush against his right wingtip, felt the plane swerve for a moment, then respond to rudder and aileron. It was a case where one moment he was supremely thankful for flying speed, and the next, as the ground of the level field was flashing under the wheels, wishing that he had held to his resolution concerning hedge hopping. The wheels struck hard. The plane bounded high, and again the wheels touched. Again the plane bounded, and this time came down with a shock that left McGee amazed with the realization that the undercarriage was intact and that he still had a chance to keep her off her nose, if only he could get the high-riding tail down. Crash! Crack! The tail was now down, and broken to splinters, like as not. Never mind. By some great mercy, he was at last on 3 points and rolling to a stop. He suddenly felt very weak. A narrow squeeze, that. Stupid way for an ace, and an instructor, to get washed out, like a warrior falling off his horse while on the way home from a victorious field. He saw Larkin bank his ship into a tight turn, set the plane down in a perfect landing, and come careening down the open field to stop within a dozen paces of McGee's plane. Larkin, white-faced, tight-lipped, crawled from his plane and came forward on the double quick. Not a word did he speak until he stood by the side of Red's plane, his hands gripping the leather piping at the edge of the cockpit until his knuckles were white. "What happened, Red? Gee, you're white. All the freckles gone." "Lucky I'm not gone," McGee answered. "My knees are too shaky to crawl out yet. It looked like fini la guerre pour moi for a second." He turned and blew a kiss at the gap in the trees. "Thanks, Mr. Woodchopper, whoever you are. Buzz, never repeat that old poem about Woodman spare that tree. If he had spared those 2, well, take a look at my tail skid, old-timer. Is it broken off?" "No, it's cracked and sort of cockeyed, but a piece of wire from that fence over there will fix it all okay. What happened?" McGee fixed him with a baleful glare. "You should ask, with as much experience as both of us have had with these tricky motors. I choked it down, that's all. That same little fault has sent many a pilot home in a wooden box. Go get me a piece of that wire. We'll fix the skid somehow, and when I get to Le Bourget, I'll set her down on 2 points. And listen, from here on in, we do—" "No contour chasing," Larkin completed, forcing a thin smile. "Seems I heard that somewhere before. Crawl out, Shrimp. You said you wanted to be out among the flowers and sweet things. Well, here's a sweet thing, and this field is full of flowers. I brought you down low so you could enjoy them." "Yeah, I said I wanted to be among 'em, not pushing 'em up. Hurry over and get that wire before I do something violent." End of Part A. Chapter 2, Part B of Aces Up by Covington Clarke. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. A Pass to Paris. 30 minutes later, two chastened pilots took off from the level field, with a half-dozen curious French peasants for an audience, and laid a straight course for Le Bourget. No more acrobatics and no more hedge-hopping. To an observer below they would have resembled two homing pigeons flying rather close together and maintaining their positions with a singleness of mind and purpose. When they reached Le Bourget, they circled the drome once, noted the windsocks on the great hangars, and dropped as lightly to the field as two tardy truant schoolboys seeking to gain entrance without attracting notice. A newly arrived American squadron was stationed at the field, jubilant over the fact that they were trying their skill on the fast-climbing, fast-flying, single-seater Spads. 5 of these swift little hawks were now on the line, making ready for a formation flight. McGee and Larkin introduced themselves to the officer in command, presented their passes and authority for refueling, and McGee requested that his tail skid be repaired and his motor checked over. "Let's stick around and watch this formation flight," McGee then said to Larkin. "I want to see what these lads can do with a real ship." "All right, but don't get goggle-eyed. I came up here to see Paris, and I'm 30 minutes behind time now." The takeoff of the 5 Spads was good and in order. McGee noticed with considerable satisfaction that the flight commander knew his business, and the 4 planes under his direction followed his signaled orders with a precision that would have been creditable in any group of pilots. "Nice work," Red said to an American captain who seemed not at all impressed. The captain was 6 feet tall, burdened by the weight of rank and the ripe old age of 24 or 25 years, and was somewhat skeptical of McGee's judgment. He wondered, vaguely, what this youthful, freckle-faced, 5'6" Royal Flying Corps lieutenant could know about nice work. Why, he couldn't be a day over 18. In fact, he might be less than that. A cadet who had just won his wings, probably. "Oh, fair," the captain admitted. McGee, sensing what was running through the captain's mind, and having no wish to set him right, winked at Larkin and said, "Let's go, Buzz. It isn't often that 2 poor ferry pilots get a 24-hour leave." Later, as they were bounding cityward in a decrepit, ancient taxi driven by a bearded, grizzled Frenchman who without makeup could assume a role in a drama of pirates and freebooters, McGee said to Larkin, "You know, Buzz, I think a lot of these American pilots are better prepared for action right now than we were when we got our wings. And we had hardly gotten ours sewed on when we were ordered to the front. These fellows will give a good account of themselves." "I think so, too. Do you remember how the cadets of our class were sent up for solo in rickety old planes held together by wire, tape, and chewing gum? Poor devils, they got washed out plenty fast. I've seen 'em go up when the expression on their faces told that they had forgotten everything they had learned. No wonder a lot of them took nose dives into the hangars and hung their planes on smokestacks and church steeples." McGee frowned, remembering some of the friends who had tried for their wings and drew crosses instead. Quickly he threw off the mood with a laugh. "Yes, and I was one of those poor devils who forgot. I'll never forget that. I had no more right being up in that old Avro than a hog has with skates. But England needed pilots, and needed them badly. I guess it was a case of what goes up must come down, and the government gave wings to the ones who came down alive. The others got angels' wings." "I suppose so. And before another month passes, the need will be greater than ever. Look what the Germans did to the British Fifth Army just last month. I'll never know what stopped 'em. But they're not through. What do you make of that long-range gun that is shelling this very city?" Dunno. Seems to me that well-directed reconnaissance flights should be able to locate that gun." "Maybe. But locate it or not, its purpose is to drive war workers out of Paris, cripple the hub of supplies, and make it more difficult for us to coordinate the service of supplies through here when they make their drive at Paris. It'll come within a month. Then we'll need every pilot and every ship that can get its wheels off the ground. I'm telling you, a month." "Think so?" "I know so. America is going to have her big chance, and may the Lord help us if she doesn't deliver. I don't know how many combat troops she has landed, but I do know that her eyes, the air service, is in need of ships. The French and English are willing to give them all the old worn-out flying coffins that they can pick up out of junk heaps. Old two-seater Spads, old ARs, 1 1/2 Strutter Sopwiths, and crates like that. If they can get new Spads, like those we saw him flying in this morning, or Nieuport 28s, or the Selmsons, which their commander has been trying to get, then all will be jake. Otherwise," he shrugged his shoulders expressively. "Otherwise," McGee took advantage of the pause, "otherwise, they'll deliver just the same, even if they have to fly Avros, Cauldrons, or tabletops. Buzz, these Americans over here have fight in their eyes. They've got spirit." "Yes, but spirit can't do much without equipment." "Huh! Ever read any history?" "What's in your mind now, little teacher?" "I read enough to pass my exams in school." "Then you've forgotten some things about American history, especially about spirit and equipment. Where was the equipment at Valley Forge? What about the troops under Washington that took the breastworks at Yorktown without a single round of powder? Just bayonets. What about the War of 1812, when we had no army and the English thought we had no navy? You don't remember those—" "That's just what I do remember," Buzz interrupted, "and that's what I'm howling about. We never have been prepared with anything except spirit. Right now we have a lot of good pilots over here, and the air service is having to beg planes from the French and English. And here we are, sent down to this front to act as instructors to a shipless squadron, at the very time when the Germans are making ready for another big drive. It's all wrong. Every minute is precious." McGee had been looking out of the window of the swaying, lurching cab that was now threading its way through hurrying traffic. "Forget it," he said. "Give old man Worry a swift kick. Here we are in Gay Paris. The war's over for 24 hours. End of Chapter 2, Part B. Chapter 2, Part C. Of Aces Up by Covington Clarke. A Pass to Paris. To all Allied soldiers on leave of absence from the front, Paris represented what McGee had voiced to Larkin, a place where the war was over for the time limits of their passes. Forgotten, for a few brief hours, were all the memories of military tedium, the roar of guns, the mud of trenches, the flaming airplane plunging earthward out of control. All these things were banished by the stimulating thought that here was the world-famous city with all its amusements, its arts, its countless beauties, open to them for a few magic hours. The fact that Paris was only a ghost of her former self made no impression on war-weary troopers. What mattered it to them that the priceless art treasures of the Louvre had been removed to the safety of the southern interior? Was it their concern that the once mighty and fearless Napoleon now lay blanketed by tons of sandbags placed over his crypt to protect revered bones from enemy air raids, or a chance hit by the long-range gun now shelling the city? What mattered it that famous cafes and chefs were now reduced to the simplest of menus? What difference did it make if the streets were darkened at night? Who that had never seen Paris in peacetime could sense that she was a stricken city hiding her sorrow and travail behind a mask of dogged, grim determination? Paris was Paris to the medley of soldiers gathered there from the 4 points of the compass, and it was the more to her credit that she could still offer amusement to uniformed men and boys whose war-weary minds found here relief from the drive of duty. Everywhere the streets were swarming with men in uniform, French, English, Australian, Canadian, New Zealanders, colored French colonials, a few Russians who, following the sudden collapse of their government, were now soldiers lacking a flag, Scotch Highlanders in their gaudy kilts, Japanese officers in spick uniforms not yet baptized in the mud of the trenches, a varied, colorful parade of young men bent on one great common objective. At night, the common magnet was the theater, and the Folies Bergère, featuring a humorous extravaganza, Zig-Zag, in which was starred a famous English comedian, drew its full quota of fun-seeking youths. It was this show that McGee and Larkin had come to see, and at the end of the first act they were ready to add their praises to the chorus of approval. During the intermission they strolled out into the flag-bedecked foyer to mingle with a crowd that was 90% military and which was in a highly appreciative frame of mind. One particularly pleasing note had been added rather unexpectedly, when one of the feminine stars in singing Scotland Forever had been interrupted by a group of Highlanders who boosted onto the stage a red-headed, bandy-legged, kilted Scotchman who had the voice of a nightingale. And when, somewhat abashed, he took up the refrain, he was joined by a thunderous chorus from the audience that made the listeners certain that Scotland would never die so long as such fervor remained in the hearts of her sons. The English soldiers, not to be outdone, had followed with God Save the King, and then, down the aisle, with a flag torn from the walls of the foyer, stalked an American sergeant, holding aloft Old Glory and leading his countrymen in the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Trust a group of soldiers to take charge of a show and run it to suit themselves. But they were pleased, beyond question, as was evidenced by the buzzing conversations during the intermission. "Great show, eh? I'll tell the world. Hey, Joe, you old son of a gun, how'd you get down here? Thought you were wiped out at Weepers." "Huh, not me. They haven't made the shell that can get me. Look who's over there with a nice cushy wound to keep him out of trouble. Old Dogface himself. Hey, Dogface, come here." Such were the greetings of soldiers who hid their real feelings behind a mask of flippancy. McGee drew Larkin into an eddy of the milling throng, where they could the better watch what Red termed the Review of the Nations. A strapping big Anzac, with a cockily rosetted Rough Rider hat, strolled arm in arm with a French Blue Devil from the Alpine Chasseurs. A kilted Highlander, 3 years absent from his homeland, and bearing 4 wound stripes on his sleeve, was trying vainly to teach the words of Scotland Forever to a Russian officer whose precise English did not encompass the confusing Scotch burr. Mixed tongues, mixed customs, variety of ideals. Infantrymen, cavalrymen, artillerymen, war pilots. Men with gray at the temples and beardless youths. Here and there a man on crutches, here and there an empty sleeve, and many breasts upon which hung medals awarded for intrepid courage. Here grizzled old Frenchmen with backs bowed by 3 years of warfare, and there fresh, clean young Americans recently landed and a little amazed that they should be looked upon as the hope of the staggering Allies. Color, color, color. Confused tongues. The buzz and babble of 1,000 half-heard conversations, the fragments of marching songs. Here was a cross-section of the Allied armies, all of them with but one purpose. How could they fail? The scene had a telling effect upon McGee and Larkin. Wordless, for a few minutes, they stood watching the throng. It was McGee who spoke first. "Did you ever see anything like it, Buzz? Just look at the different uniforms. There, look over there. A bunch of American bluejackets. Wonder how they got here." "Humph. Wonder how all of us got here. That's what I've been thinking about. This is just a moment snatched from the lives of all these fellows. What went before? What homes did they come from, and who was waiting for them? And what comes to them tomorrow? Gee." He shook his head slowly. "It doesn't do to think about it. You want to find out about them, and you get to wishing they could all go on back home tomorrow. Say, who started this talk, anyhow? Come on, let's go back in." "Wait a minute." McGee seized his arm and turned him around. "There's plenty of time before the curtain. Look, Buzz. See that black fellow over there in French colonial OD? Came from Algiers, I guess, or Senegal, maybe. What brought him here? And what sort of stories will he tell when he gets back home? Will he tell about what he did? Or will he talk about what he saw and what others did?" "I don't know. Why?" "Well, this has set me to thinking. We're all here on exactly the same business. The uniform doesn't count so much, nor does the branch of the service. It's just a question of getting the job done. A sort of heave-ho altogether now. Get me?" "Yes, I guess so. What are you driving at?" "This. See that American sergeant over there? The one who carried the flag down the aisle and jumped up on the stage? Yes, big fellow, isn't he? You said it. The biggest duck in this puddle, in more ways than one. And I want to get into the uniform he is wearing. Understand, Buzz? Oh, I'm proud enough of the one I'm wearing. But when he started the national anthem, and they all came in on that chorus, "Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?" Well, I felt cold shivers running up and down my backbone. None of the other songs did that to me. Do you get me, Buzz? Sure. I felt it too. He put both his hands on Red's shoulders, holding him off at arm's length. You want back under the old stars and stripes, don't you, you little shrimp? Yes. And yet, I know how you feel. I'm with you, fellow, when you get ready to make the change. McGee's eyes lighted with surprise and joy. Really, Buzz? Surest thing you know. And you don't think we'd feel we'd feel like two Americans going home. Shake, little feller. There, I feel better already. Come on, let's go in. That's the curtain bell. End of Chapter 2, Part C.